Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's NCBI's Advocacy Talks. This month, we're focusing on equitable education, which is a new report that NCBI is going to be launching next week. We're delighted to be joined by Eithne Walsh, who is an advocate, head of advocacy with FAIC, which is an organisation that we work very closely with in NCBI, who works with parents of children with a vision impairment. And Eithne will introduce herself in a moment to us all. But before I hand over to Eithne, I'm just going to say as well, we're due to be joined by Katie Abrahams, but unfortunately she's having some technical difficulties at the minute. We're hoping that in the behind the scenes here we'll be able to get her in with us. But just to let you know that that is the case, and hopefully we'll be joined by Katie in a few moments. In the meantime, as we talk to Eithne, I would just ask if anybody has any questions to please just pop them into the chat. You have the chat function and the Q&A function on the top of the screen. And if anybody has any questions for Eithne as we go through the session, please do pop them in the chat, and at the end of that I'll be able to bring them up with Eithne. So Eithne, without any further ado, I'm more than happy to hand over to you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Okay, thanks a million, Lorna, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk here and meet fellow advocates. My name is Eithne Walsh. I'll just give you a little bit of background to myself. I have 3 children, 2 of who are visually impaired. Maya is 21 and she's in UCC studying speech therapy, and Cormac is 18 and he is doing his leaving cert. So both of them have a deteriorating eye condition. So I will talk today from the point of view of being a mother and how we progressed, how we navigated the educational system, and I'll also talk about my work with FAIC. So currently I'm head of communication and advocacy in FAIC. FAIC is so small you can be head of anything you actually want. So just to put that in context. So I have a lot of experience also of talking to parents around the country. The first thing I'd like to say is that reading the Equitable Education Report, it was almost like at the moment when, you think the emperor's had no clothes on, but you don't want to say it, like you're going mad, but and then suddenly the whole world says actually he's wearing no clothes, and it's like a vindication or validation of what you've been witnessing over the last 16 years. So every single thing that came up in the report has either happened to my children, or I've supported people it's happening to in education, or has happened to in education. So that's the first thing. It's really powerful from that point of view, in that it's the first real piece of research so that we can actually refer to, and that's a powerful thing, because often when you're advocating, you're discounted as, I'm sure people are always complaining, there's always something wrong, look how much money we're spending in education, and we had no proof. Always it was, look, that's anecdotal evidence. So that's where the importance of this and the importance of this whole roadshow and launching the report next week lies. And to me, it's like the first step of, there are lots of little things happening in the background, but I think this is going to be the first step in bringing that on and actually making 5 or 6 action points that we can put on the table and say, right, now this needs to be done. So I don't know how long you want me to talk for, but that's just my piece about the advocacy report. I can tell you a little bit about my kids' journey, and then I can tell you about other stuff that has come up for other people. Please interrupt me if you want to ask a question as you think of it, or push it in the chat. And if I see a chat, I'll stop, because sometimes you get somebody can be going on about something that isn't relevant. So anyway, interrupt me if you want. So my 2 kids, as I said, have been through the educational system. When they were first diagnosed, you're in a terrible place and you're very shocked. At the time, there wasn't a young person service in NCBI, so we were even more isolated than people are now. And we can see that there is a huge difference in people who are supported early, how they approach the disability. Anyway, so there was very little support. One thing I did feel was there was visiting teacher service in school. I felt the schools were experts, they were dealing with disability all the time, and that was one area I didn't really have to worry about. I could worry about everything else. But after about 2 years, it became really clear to me that actually the school didn't really know what they were doing. Maya was being sent off in with groups of kids who had completely different needs to her, and basically her resource class was a class of colouring and drawing and just time out really. I knew as well that she needed much more support than that, so it kind of came as a dawning on me, and then I sprung into action. And what I did was, there was a lot of conversations with school where I kind of went in and said, look, her needs are different. There was a little bit of resistance to this at the start, but when I had a few meetings, and what I had done is I'd armed myself with people, talking to people in the UK, talking to a head, and I kind of had a framework that I thought would work for her. And then I got in front of the teachers and we began to put this in place. And so what happened with Maya, and what I really began to realise, was actually the parent really has to lead this, that the schools don't have the knowledge, that often this was their first visually impaired child in the school, and to be honest with you, that's the way it is all around the country. Also, you could have one visually impaired child in the school and another one comes in and their needs are completely different. So Maya went through the school. There were a few times when issues that other people are experiencing in that report happened. I was always able to go in, we'd talk about it, tease it out, and everything was sorted. But what I realised was I was an exceptional case. I was in a really lucky position that I was part-time, so I could always go in and out of the school. I was also very lucky that I'm a local coach in the area. I do a lot of volunteer work, so everybody knew me, and unfortunately you tend to get a different reception when you're well known in the community. So I had a lot of things going for me. So Maya got through primary and secondary school quite well, and so did Cormac. Having said that, there were hiccups. The hiccups that came up for other people, like technology hiccups, happened for us too. What we ended up doing with a lot of that, my husband has IT support in his work, and we use that IT support to get technical issues sorted out. That is not available to everybody, and it's totally impractical. So things like you get the Irish education system is quite good at giving you a piece of equipment, but the before, the after and the in between aren't supported. So often a piece of equipment will be sitting in the school and the child is not getting the use out of it. And people say, oh, it's great she has her laptop, but the laptop is not being used. It's great she has her magnifier, but the magnifier is not being used, or it's been used only a tiny bit, and it's not been used in a way that will future-proof things for her. What I did then, because I had a second child coming on, I kind of wrote out my own notes, and I had a plan for my kids going forward. I had, throughout both their educations, there was a couple of rows along the way, but they were always sorted out. And in my experience, I always had fantastic teachers, fantastic special education teachers and fantastic principals, but that is not always the case. And again, part of that was the fact that I was in and out and I was able to develop a relationship. I don't think that's fair. I think when a child goes into school with a visual impairment, they should be entitled to get the support they need. They should be entitled to get the assistive technology support they need, and they should be entitled to everything they require, and it shouldn't be dependent on how much your parent is able to fight for them, how well they know the people in the community. So that's something that comes up in the report again and again and again, and it's something that now that it's out there we can begin to tackle. As I said, I have lots and lots of stories about my child's education that I can tell you, and we can discuss later in greater detail, but I'd like to get everything out there and then you come back to me with questions. With my role in FAIC as advocacy, what I decided to do then was I felt like, why should every school have to reinvent the wheel? So together with other FAIC parents, we began to make guides for parents so they would be prepared for what was going to happen, and they would go in and be more proactive about when an individual education plan should happen, what should happen, and they should begin to advocate like I had, and that was working quite well. But what we did find was schools still didn't know. There is a visiting teacher service there, but the visiting teacher service has 14 visiting teachers for blind and visually impaired children, and it simply is not enough. The service that our kids require would really need about 20 to 30 kids on a visiting teachers list. That's how it works in America. That's why they're teachers, because they are coming in to teach. Our visiting teachers cannot have that role with 100 kids. And that point hasn't really been recognised, and that needs to be tackled, because if the visiting teacher can't give that level of support, that level of support has to be given. So it's finding the gaps where the service is missing out, and the National Council for Special Ed and the schools will have to be able to fill those gaps. So the same gaps come up again and again, and so I have advocated and helped parents with regard to technology, with regard to ensuring that their children are transferred over to digital books early enough on, so they're not making that changeover in secondary school. With regard to that they have enough SNA support when they get technology, or enough SNA support throughout their schooling just to support the child. Now, SNA support is a pro and a con, as in it's great, but sometimes SNAs can be relied on too much for the child to access the curriculum, because what we always teach, and I know NCBI are blue in the face teaching it, is initially you give the child access to the curriculum by enlarging everything and giving them the magnifier, but then you teach them how to access. So the idea is that they are independent learners. As that happens, the SNA steps away and the child is then able to fend for themselves, and that's really vital for them going into secondary school. What we would always say is that there are times when you need more support than others, but that needs to be managed, and part of that managing is this whole planning process that is missing and that is ad hoc. So the lack of IEPs, the lack of transition plans, that came in very, very strongly in the report. Those are the things that contribute to all these gaps. So therefore you have a kid who has technology but can't use it, a kid who is still on large print books going into secondary. Large print books won't work very well. A kid that has all their books in digital print on a bookshelf, but nobody has the technology to download them, and nobody has been given that information. These are all, like, they're frustrating in that they are so simple to solve. The first thing was identifying them. So the report has identified them, and now they've put it plainly there. And what we need next is a plan of attack. We have been able to, in fact, after we produced our parents' guides, we then got together and produced a primary school guide for teachers. So what we did there was we pulled on all the teachers we knew who had good outcomes, all the principals, all the special education teachers, and we consulted with them over a period of 6 months, and we said to them, what do you need? And one of the things they said to us is, we're given far too much information. So what we need is we need you to tell us what to do, how we can improve things. We don't necessarily need to know all the details about the visual impairment, or larger details about subjects that we don't choose. So what we have done in our primary school guide is we have broken it down into the expanded core curriculum. We've explained that to teachers, and believe it or believe it not, an awful lot of them didn't actually understand about the expanded core curriculum. So they didn't understand a small thing, that a visually impaired child will access the curriculum differently. So they have to be taught those skills to access. So many times teacher thought once they had their magnifier and once the visiting teacher dropped in and out, that was them sorted. They didn't need everything else. When we explained to them that actually they need certain skills put in place at certain kind of important times, then they will know how to access the curriculum, then they become more independent. What we found with when we produced the guide was one of the most important things to go into it was the eye information sheet, because teachers said we get these huge reports. It could be from the visiting teacher, you could get one from an OT, a speech and language therapist, and a physiotherapist. It's misinformation by too much information. Give me a page to tell me what the child can see in feet. Tell me, can they see the board? Tell me the text they need me to produce stuff on the board. Tell me how I can communicate with them to give them homework. Really simple stuff that basically the teacher and the parent can work out themselves. If the parent gets their NCBI visual assessment, they can actually put the information in themselves. And this was a real game changer. Teachers then felt they had the knowledge to support the child correctly. So that's where we are at the moment. We are producing a post-primary guide, and that's really badly needed as well. We hope to have that done this autumn. With regard to the teacher's guide, and this is why I think there's a lot of hope around education, in the last 9 months, 180 teachers have contacted us for the guide. So teachers are really open to this. They are starving for knowledge. And so many of them have joined our page, not our page, our mailing list, because they want to be involved. If we're having a webinar on technology or downloading books, they want to be there. So the will is there on the part of the teacher. So what's missing is the knowledge and how we can put it in place in ways that it's usable, as opposed to the way it has been in the past, because I can tell you now, and I suppose you can see from the report itself, that it's not working. So I'm going to, I'll leave it there. If anyone wants to come in and ask me some questions, I'm very conscious that I could be talking about stuff that people don't want to know about. So is there any questions in the chat, or is there anything anyone wants to ask me about in particular?
That's great, Eithne. Thank you so much. And I suppose just for everyone's awareness, the Equitable Education Report is launching next Thursday, and is actually being launched by the CEO of the National Council for Special Education that Eithne has mentioned there, John Carney. And I think that's going to be a really important moment. As Eithne has said, the report is an evidence base for an awful lot of experiences that people have shared with us over the last number of years and decades, really, in terms of challenges that people have had. And everyone, would be delighted if people would like to join us. The event is on the website and it's open to all to attend. So on the NCBI website, please do come along and join us next Thursday for the launch of the report. In terms of some questions, Eithne, I suppose one of the things that you said there was around misinformation by too much information. And I think that really, really hit home, particularly when doing the report. It became very clear to me that, you know, and that teachers and support staff and school staff, the school and education community, there were some really, really good people there who were really trying their best, but you can't really rely on the goodwill of individuals, I suppose. And that's where one of the issues really comes through. And it is about giving the teachers the tools to be able to support children and young people. And I suppose in terms of the solutions to that, you've mentioned the guide, which I think will be absolutely vital and will be such a pivotal piece of our tool, I suppose, for our teachers into the future. But I wonder, from your perspective, if you think that, you know, is there something that needs to happen on a system level to be able to support that, you know? So obviously there's, as you say, over 180, I think it was, teachers who've been in touch with you, which is phenomenal. But I suppose, is there something that we're missing some, you know? You'll always miss an individual here or there, but from a system level, we could try and address that. And I wonder if you think that that's something we could do, or how that could be done, I suppose, on a systematic level or a sectoral level across the board, rather than the individual goodwill, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. When we produce the guides, the guide in particular, we are not professionals, and it was almost like a little bit of social anarchy, because there were people within education who said, what are you doing producing that? This is none of your business. And you know, there are professionals out there doing that. But we just felt, look, we're 20 years having the same argument. It's not being provided, and we think it's better to provide something than nothing. And also, there's policy in education, and then there's lived experience. So the policy often doesn't match the lived experience. When we produced the guide, I think education, some of those people who had said you can't do that looked at it and went, oh, that's actually quite interesting. But for us, the 180 teachers who came forward and said, please give us the guide, was the biggest validation we've ever got. It was a validation for us. But in my opinion, it was an awful indictment of the education system that they hadn't even been given that level of information. And it shows you that sometimes you actually just have to get up and try and fix something, and that creates enough change to make a difference. I went in last week, I met John Carney, and I have to say, I've been doing this for 14 years. He's the first head of National Council for Special Education that I really would be encouraged. We left there with 6 action points, and I felt, well, I have to go back in 6 months' time. I feel things are happening now. I feel between this little bit of social anarchy we did last year, producing this manual, and starting to have webinars. We began to have webinars where we invited teachers along, and again, they came in their drove. So I think it really was a wake-up call that actually, you know, we need to provide more solid support to teachers. the National Council for Special Ed have just finished a CPD for teachers of blind and visually impaired children. Now that's the first one they've done, I think, ever. And again, I'm just going to say that and leave it there. I think it marks a good step. They're starting to prepare to think the way we're thinking and getting teachers in and educating them. It was really, really tough for teachers. They didn't know what they were supposed to do. The thing about the post-primary guide, and that's what's even more interesting, is it gets, and this comes up again and again when you talk to parents, they got on okay in primary school. Secondary school, it all goes to hell because they weren't skilled up enough. The transition wasn't planned, and it's a whole different system. In school, they have one teacher and one resource teacher. So the communication is really simple. In secondary school, they have 10 to 12 teachers. So what was happening was send in reports, get everything in there. And when my son went into first year, we'd sent all the reports in, we got everything in there. And still 70% of his first year teachers didn't know he had a visual impairment. And that was really a wake up call for me. So when I was doing this guide, what I did was, we've got, again, the eye information sheet. And we've tell parents on the first week of school, you send the eye information sheet with the photo of your child and a covering email saying, this is my son, he's in your class, email me if you need any support. And you send that to the 12 teachers. Because when I did that in January, all of the teachers got back and said, oh, it's great to have someone to talk to, you know, touch base with. Because even though the visiting teacher is in, she might be only in twice a year, and otherwise they're walking around like headless chickens, not really knowing what to do. But once I reached out to them, then, you know, there's always going to be a few, but 80% were very willing to ask for support and make sure everything was working. So that's a big game changer, and that's going to be in our post-primary guide. With regard to NCBI, to me, there's a large part around the technology piece. The technology is delivered to the school. The backup before, after, and into the future is never strong enough. Now, I have always said that external bodies like yourself should be brought in as a team with for our children in school. You know, it doesn't like other disabilities have a whole team of people going in. So it's almost like the visiting teacher can order the technology. She does not have the time to do the follow-up, to train, or to do support afterwards to ensure that it's been future-proofed, that extra keyboard skills like the shortcut keys and that have been taught. In my opinion, and what VEC will be pushing for, is that a specialist service like that comes into play, and it's a whole new service. We'll have to fight for it. I think it sits very nicely with one of the support services like yourself, but that would be something that I think is an easy fix that could be initiated in the next 2 or 3 years, and that would make a massive difference. Because let's face it, 12 years ago, technology wasn't embedded in education the way it is now. Now it is, and that really needs to be addressed. It's not being addressed at the moment, and that's why there's huge issues around it.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic. I think the point that you made there around that kind of future-proofing skills and so on came up so clearly through the interviews that we did when we were writing this report. And you know, I think it very much is around trying to think to the years ahead and think to the transitions. And as you say, the transition from primary to post-primary is so vastly different and can be extremely challenging if not planned appropriately, and if those individual assessments and so on don't take place. And the point that you make around, you know, there's a difference between access to learning and then learning to access and to support people to be those independent learners into the future as well. And the two are, I suppose, the one is, they're both on the same coin. They're one side of a double-sided coin in terms of access to learning and then learning to access through the technology skills and so on that you've already referenced. And I do think that's something that came through very clearly from the report. Another question that has came in here is in terms of, you mentioned that schools may not have had a student with a vision impairment previously, and that is very often the case across the country. So in terms of advice that you'd give to parents, I suppose, going into the schools, you mentioned a guide there, and I think we'll get the links to some of those resources that you've mentioned to be able to put up with this onto the website. But in terms of how parents could be proactive in getting those supports in place quickly and early for their children in a school maybe where there hasn't been anyone with a vision impairment previously, what advice could you potentially give to parents in that situation?
So what we do is we have a guide for parents for every stage up to 12, and one of those will be a transition from preschool to school, and that gives them a list of instructions to do, like contact the visiting teacher is one, but a lot of people would contact the visiting teacher and say, oh, that's it, job done. You then need to really manage it from there on. So you go into the school before school starts, you bring your child, you make sure, and we give you a list of things that you need to be looking out for. Then you go into school when your child is before starting school, so they know the lay of the land. What we've done actually is we've developed a checklist for every term of what needs to be done, so you can make sure you've done it. Like, if you break everything down, everything is doable. Now, ultimately, what you would be hoping is that, and I'm saying this, parents are working full time, and this can be really, really tricky to do. However, if you put the early work in, you're setting the standard for your child, and for the school really understanding what's going on, and not just thinking, ah, she's bright as a button, look at her running around there, and you'd never know there was anything is wrong. So what parents should do is you contact us, and we give you, it's like a pack almost of, you need to do this, and within that pack is a checklist of certain things that need to be done, down to things like in April, you make sure the visiting teacher has ordered the books for next year. You know, there's all these tiny things that accumulate over time, and they stop things like, ah, yeah, look, her books never arrived. They usually come after Christmas. It stops things like that becoming acceptable, because it's very easy to have that as acceptable in primary school, because we're all about making sure the child is okay. But that started a really poor precedent, and then before you know it, your child is way underperforming. And people say, oh, don't worry, she's only in primary school, but it's your expectations should be as high. And as for your sighted child, and that was one thing that really struck me when my kids started. So Alva was, say Alva was in 3rd class and Maya was in 1st class, and this is when I began to take over with Maya, and it was that every teacher that talked about Alva and Maya talked in very different terms. So we'd go in and we'd have the parent-teacher meeting, and they'd talk about Alva in terms of her education, how she was getting on. There's a checkbox of things they talk about. They talk about Maya and say, oh, she is just gorgeous, and she's so quiet, and she's so polite, and you know, you'd never know, and I wouldn't worry about her. They were trying to, in doing that, they thought they were helping us, but what they were actually doing was disabling her further. And I was just so struck by their expectations were so much lower for Maya. And I'd say that was my starting point, because I was looking at her saying, they're 2 kids, Maya can't see very well, but otherwise all things are equal. And I really got on the pony said I need to change this, and that's what I want changed for everybody else out there. It's to make sure that there isn't this I think it's called ableist language around your child, as in saying things, and I would have said it only if I didn't have this knowledge, like, God, you'd never know, isn't she great? And that in a way is very disrespectful of her disability, you know, and it's really important to be mindful about that and talk about it in positive ways. And so you don't end up with this low expectations, because really, if you analyze what's going on, anything that's accepted and considered acceptable around our kids' education is because of low expectations. So you really have to go in there and expect higher expectations. When I had the first few conversations with the school, they came around, and Cormac was in a different school, and I had the exact same conversations with them, and both schools came to me at the end of the year and said, you know what, we didn't really know what you were talking about at the start, but actually we fully understand it now. And that's a really important thing, I think, for people to take on board, and everybody involved in this advocacy network. You can advocate every single day by stopping that, I'm sure it's called ableist or ableism, where people talk in terms of people who are able and disable and all of this, you know, and stop that type of dialogue. And that's really, really important. And I think that's at the crux of what's going on here in education. So it helps us increase our expectations and increase everyone's expectations around what being blind and visually impaired is. Okay, it can be a pain in the neck, but you know, honestly, you should be able to achieve what other people achieve if the right supports are put in place, and that's what we're all here for.
You know, that's a very good point in terms of if the right supports are put in place. And it's very hard to put those right supports in place if you don't acknowledge and recognise that those supports are needed. And the ableist language that you mentioned there could actually be unintentionally a way where people aren't necessarily getting those supports, because you're trying to your mindset is in that space rather than recognising that somebody has vision impairment. And to ensure that they can achieve their goals and succeed in whatever it is that they wish to do, they require those different types of supports. And that's a really interesting point. Thank you so much. One last one that's came in before I wrap up with one final one for you. So two, I suppose, unless any more come through in the meantime. But the first one here is actually in relation to incidental learning or more social elements of education and school and things like that, not necessarily the curriculum, but more so in relation to social interaction and friendships and those kind of experiences. And is there any advice that you'd have for people maybe who've had struggles with their children in those kind of social development spaces as well, that would pertain to school and maybe, I suppose, more community based as well? I know the question is related to school, but I suppose it does kind of have a wider context there too.
Well, I suppose from my experience, there's a couple of things. First of all, I can guarantee you they will, and I don't mean to be negative or pessimistic, they will have struggles. It's a fact of life and it happens. And that struggle might be early on or it could be later on, but it will happen. And that is part of going through life different than other people. Okay, so the best thing, first of all, because we didn't know in the beginning that Maya and Cormac were visually impaired, we did everything as normal. That was actually hugely beneficial to them. My thing I always say to parents is take the lead from them up to a point, but if they are very nervous, don't let them opt out of everything. What I always say is it's actually harder for our kids. So if you are a mother in the jungle and one of your kids is missing, years ago, missing one arm, you don't shelter that child, you give them the skills to make sure they can survive, and it's as basic as that. So I always push my kids out to do as much as possible. And I was an athletics coach as well, so they were involved in sport. Sport is so crucial because it really helps with balance, with ordinary integration and competitiveness, but it helps with all the things that get much more difficult as you get older, particularly if you have a deterioration in eyesight. And I see that in my kids, because they did it up until a certain age, their balance and core and strength is very, very strong. So the other thing is the self-esteem thing. It's self-esteem is a really hard thing, and I'm not qualified to answer it. One thing I would say is, and it's a mistake I made, is I used to talk about their disability in negative terms at times, and I regret doing that. But look, life's a journey and you learn, okay? So you don't want to be toxic positive about it either, but it's getting that balance of being realistic, but also trying to turn things around give them the space to give out about it if they want to, but also turn it around into a positive thing as well, because it's only something I've realized in the last while that I would, oh God, I don't even want to say it, but I'd say, oh, don't go so close to the phone and things. And I feel terrible now because they weren't doing it on purpose, but as a fully sighted person, you sometimes make mistakes like that. So I know I've gone all over the place with that answer, sorry, but it's a really good question. I don't have the answer except to say, don't shield them, get them out into sports and social activity as much as you can, and try and be positive about their loss of vision while giving them the space to complain about it if they want to. So
yeah, I think and look, I think your honesty there is really helpful, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who may kick themselves about something that happened yesterday or last week or whatever the case may be. And I think the point that you made there about that we're all on a journey, and look, as humans, we can all make mistakes, and it's about, I suppose, trying to recognize them and learn from them and move on from them and not hold ourselves in wraps over them, and try to keep going. Look, thank you so much. And Eithne, the last question that I just have for you is that for other parents who may not have been involved with FAIC yet, or may not know about your group and so on that's active, is there anywhere that they can find out more, or how should anybody try and get in touch with you after today?
Okay, so we have a website, faic.ie, and go on there and you'll see all about us, okay? Then I would email into our Gmail account, so it's faic@gmail.com, and that email address is there. Just tell us you want to join our mailing list, and then we will send out and the age of your child, and we can send out guides for the child's age. We can send out the primary school guide, or if it's post-primary, we'll send that out. There's also a private group page where it's only parents of kids who are blind and visually impaired, and this is a really great space to go in. You can just look and listen, see what comes up, anything new that's happening, or opinions on different technology you'll find in there, or else you can get on and ask some of your questions yourself. We are having a family information day, which is the first in-person event we've had in 3 years. At the moment, it's nearly fully booked, but you email us, and what we're trying to do at the moment is we're negotiating more places with the hotel, and we're seeing who's not coming, because we want to get every single person who wants to come to this, because it's really important to meet other parents and get support from them. It's great for the kids to meet other kids who are visually impaired, and their siblings to meet their siblings, and we've great speakers at it. We have a panel of young people talking about how they got through school or college or travel, and we have Paul Kelly, who's CEO of Fáilte Ireland, and he's visually impaired himself. So look at our website and email us. Then I would join Facebook, our private group, which is called FAOC, and you'll get asked a couple of questions and then you join. So please, the more parents we have, the stronger our voices, and it's really obvious from this report, we need to harness our voices. I feel we have somebody in John Carney who's actually going to begin to move stuff. So now is the time to get as many voices together and start making noise and making change ourselves.
Together we are stronger, as they say. And actually, just before I let you go, Eithne, there's another one that's just came in, so I'll ask. So we have a question here from a principal teacher who's actually vision impaired themselves, they were wondering, have the courses for resource teachers any component on children with vision impairment? Are you aware of that?
Oh, that's such a good question. A very small component. That's why this CPD for being held by the visiting teacher is very important. I think it's going to lead to other components. So that continual professional development will be open to teachers and special education teachers, as far as I'm aware. They've told us that they'll give me the list, and we have I think the 180 teachers, we have most of them on the mailing list. So we're going to tell them when that's happening. It is an issue, and I think they're becoming aware of it, that it's very, very lightly covered. The old idea was, sure, the visiting teachers are there to cover that, but it is too complex a job now, and too complex. There needs too much support around it between technology and downloading books and stuff, that isn't really adequate. So the short answer is it's touched on very briefly, but not much. And the long answer is they're certainly holding one for teachers and special education teachers, and we will have the dates for that soon. So you can contact us and go on our teachers list, or keep your eye on the National Council for Special Educations, where they put their CPDs. I don't know how they contact people, but it is something, actually, we would love to, whoever you are, speak to you, or maybe you come on one of our webinars, because we have a fair amount of our kids always want to become teachers, and I think to have the life experience, or the lived experience of somebody who is a principal and is visually impaired would be really strong. So it would be great if that person could get in touch with us.
I can link you up, absolutely.
Yeah, we'd have a lot to learn from you. It would be really brilliant for us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Unfortunately, Katie wasn't able to get through. I know she's listening. She can get through to the other side, but can't get through to this side. Technology, it's great when it works, but unfortunately not working for us today. So Katie, just to acknowledge your presence there, and to apologise for not being able to get you through onto this side of the call. But what I will say to everybody is Katie is going to be joining us next week alongside Eithne for the launch of the report, which is taking place on next Thursday, in Temple Bar in the Ark, which is on Eustace Street. So this day next week at 3 p.m, the 22nd, we'll be launching the Equitable Education Report. And as I say, we'll be joined on the day by the CEO of the NCSE, John Carney, who Eithne has already mentioned, alongside Eithne and Katie, and another student who's actually currently in post-primary school, to speak about their experiences. So we will be delighted if anybody here would like to come along and join us on the day. As I say, the event is up on the website, you can register there, or you can contact me directly on lorna.fitzpatrick@ncbi.ie, and I'd be happy to make sure you have all of the information about the launch next week. As always, all of our advocacy events are advertised on the website, our local advocacy networks right across the country, our future advocacy talks, and we're also in the middle of a roadshow right across the country as well. So far we have hit 3 different locations in Galway, Letterkenny and in Navan earlier this week. Next Monday we are in Cork in the City Library in Cork, and that's the 19th, and on the 27th, which is Tuesday week, we are in Wexford Public Library as well. So if any of our listeners are in either Cork or Wexford or in the surrounding areas and would like to come along, please do let me know, and again you can register on the website there. As always, folks, thanks very much for your time today, and as Eithne said, together we will be able to create change, which is what advocacy is all about. Garmila Magad, thanks very much for your time today, everybody. Take care.
Thanks a million.